In 1978, three seasoned cave divers journeyed to Athens, Greece, eager to explore a famous tourist hotspot known for its stunning waters. Beneath this tranquil swimming destination lay a mysterious and largely uncharted cave system. The divers sought the thrill of venturing into these unknown depths, embarking on what they hoped would be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. However, they made virtually every possible mistake in cave diving, turning their expedition into a desperate fight for survival. In the end, they were sucked into a bottomless hole, never to be seen again. These are the final moments of the Volagmeni Lake diving tragedy. Nestled just a few hundred yards from the Saronic Gulf and approximately 15 miles south of Athens lies Lake Volagmeni, a beautiful yet popular tourist swimming spot. While it only has a surface area of 1 square mile, its stunning topography and breathtaking views compensates for its modest size. The crystal-clear turquoise waters rivals those of the Caribbeans, and the lake is flanked by a dramatic sheer rock wall on one side and a bustling resort park on the other. Every year, countless tourists and locals come to relax on plush lounge chairs under shady umbrellas all across the base of the lake. Visitors typically come to swim, picnic, and bask in the sun, marveling at the picturesque views. On the other hand, some are drawn to its spring-fed, mineral-rich waters, believed to possess healing properties that alleviate chronic conditions such as asthma and arthritis. However, beneath this serene and picturesque surface lies a complex network of caves, chambers, and passageways, adding a mysterious depth to the tranquil waters above. Officially, the cave at Lake Volagmeni was first explored by a German dive team in the 1940s, facing a tiny entrance with a strong, turbulent flow of water unlike anything they had encountered. The divers were uncertain whether they would be sucked deep into the cave's depths or emerge unharmed. But despite the risks, they ventured inside. These determined explorers navigated the dark, intricate underwater maze, creating rudimentary maps from memory after each expedition. Although they made significant progress, a considerable portion of the cave remained unexplored due to its vast size and complexity. Near the entrance, they discovered a large chamber that branched into no fewer than 14 distinct passageways, each veering off in nearly every direction. The largest of these passageways extended over 2,600 feet and widened up to 495 feet, suggesting the presence of some massive cavernous rooms. In fact, the Germans theorized these passageways might connect to an even larger cave complex nearby. However, they would end their exploration here, as going into these unknown passageways would be extremely risky. Halfway across the globe, Mark and Joan Granford were siblings who grew up in Sacramento, California. The pair, who shared a tight-knit bond from childhood, pursued two very different paths. Mark carved out a career as a painter, while Joan enlisted in the US Air Force. Eventually, Joan would be relocated to a base 7,000 miles away in Athens, Greece, which only made the siblings miss each other's company even more. In Greece, Joan formed a close bond with a colleague, Donald Mitchard, who was a decade her senior. The two discovered a mutual passion for diving, a hobby that quickly became the centerpiece of their friendship. In fact, their shared interests led them to explore the underwater realms of Greece, diving frequently during their stationing. By the spring of 1978, Mark was ready to pause his painting career. Frustrated with his current path, he was consumed by wanderlust and eager to get a change of scenery. When Joan invited him to Greece, he seized the chance, excited by her tales of missing him and promises of touring historical sites and exploring the country's best dive spots together. For Mark, this trip promised a much-needed recharge and a deeper sense of purpose. So he quickly booked his flight and arranged his travel with little hesitation. At this point, both siblings were relatively adept divers. Joan, though only diving for a few years, had developed strong technical skills and was known for her meticulous approach to safety. She rigorously checked her equipment and prepared thoroughly to ensure each dive was as safe as possible. She always prioritized caution, which, as you'll soon see, made this tragedy so much more confusing and mysterious. After months of eager planning, Mark arrived in Athens in early September of 1978. He and Joan spent the first few days rekindling their bond while exploring Athens' historical marvels. Yet their conversations always circled back to their planned dive at Lake Volagmeni. They were aware of tales about divers who had vanished within its depths, never to return, but they refused to let these stories ruin their fun. After all, they only expected to be in the water for a few hours. The plan was simple: dive the cave, return to Athens, enjoy a meal, and relax. However, as events unfolded that day, their expectations would be dramatically derailed. On September 9th, the two siblings met with Donald, who would be accompanying them on the dive. The trio's excitement was palpable as they drove from Athens to Lake Volagmeni under perfect weather conditions. Upon arrival, Mark was captivated by the lake's stunning beauty. It was just as Joan had described. They quickly retrieved their diving gear from the car and suited up, with Donald taking the lead as the most seasoned diver of the group. However, despite the collective experience of the trio, their preparations for the dive were surprisingly naive for such seasoned divers. They overlooked several critical safety measures, errors typically made by novices. Notably, they neglected to bring adequate lighting, even though they were aware of the absence of natural light within the cave. Moreover, they didn't pack spare air tanks, a common oversight for divers planning brief, uncomplicated dives. This oversight could prove risky, leaving them without a backup if they consumed more oxygen than expected or encountered unexpected difficulties along the way. However, perhaps the most critical lapse was their failure to set a guideline at the cave's entrance, a fundamental safety protocol in cave diving. Guidelines are vital as they provide a lifeline back to the entrance, especially crucial in environments where disorientation is a risk due to dark, silt-laden waters. But despite these significant oversights, the group, led by Donald, ventured confidently into the clear, warm waters, making their way to the cave's entrance beneath the imposing cliff on the lake's north side. Reaching the cave's entrance was the easy part. However, the trio was taken aback by the powerful inward flow of water at the narrow entrance. It almost felt like being suctioned in. While this meant they wouldn't need to exert much energy entering the cave, they anticipated a challenging exit, especially because they would be fatigued and potentially low on oxygen towards the end. Despite the forceful currents that they expected might intensify deeper within the cave, they downplayed the warning signs. After all, they were all confident in their physical fitness and were convinced they wouldn't dive too deeply or exert themselves excessively. One by one, they entered the darkness through the narrow passage. Inside, they encountered a vast chamber dominated by imposing vertical structures known as the chimneys. The three divers paused briefly to take in the awe-inspiring sight, but they pressed onward shortly after. About 400 feet further, they reached another constricted passageway. This one was so tight that they could barely squeeze through. Beyond it seemed to lead to a larger chamber where the inward flow of water grew even more intense than before. At this point, they were all holding onto jagged rocks to prevent themselves from being swept away. Before continuing, they attempted to peer into the narrow opening's darkness to gauge what lay ahead. Their amateur lights barely cut through the blackness, revealing only that the ground descended sharply. Although they didn't know the true size of the chamber, they sensed it was vast and more expansive than any they had previously encountered. Yielding to the strong current of the water, they let themselves drift away from the jagged rocks and into the vast chamber. What happened next remains unclear, but soon after entering, Donald, Mark and Joan lost sight of the entrance and found themselves disorientated in the enveloping darkness. Their erratic movements, likely from panic, stirred up the silt from the chamber's floor, plunging their visibility to zero within seconds. Now completely blind, deep inside the cave, and pulled by a strong current, their situation grew more dangerous with each passing second. Instinct might have driven them to swim vigorously, but doing so risked pulling them deeper into the cave system rather than back towards the exit. With the entrance out of sight and devoid of any visual bearings, panic set in. To make the situation worse, it's likely that they were also experiencing the early stages of nitrogen narcosis, a condition similar to drunkenness caused by breathing compressed gas at this depth. This condition can lead to euphoria and disorientation, compelling divers to make rash decisions. In severe cases, like theirs, nitrogen narcosis can transform a routine dive into a life-threatening ordeal in mere moments. When Donald, Mark and Joan failed to emerge from the water after several hours, other divers grew alarmed and alerted the authorities. Police and a team of specialized search and rescue divers were quickly dispatched. They conducted a comprehensive search of Lake Volagmeny and the immediate vicinity of the cave's entrance, but found no trace of the missing Americans. No equipment, such as tanks, masks, or fins, which are often lost in diving accidents, was recovered. Eventually, elite divers from both the American and Greek navies were called in to assist, but despite their expertise, these teams were no more successful than the initial search efforts. By the next morning, the grim reality set in. The chances of finding the divers alive were slim, unless they had found a rare air pocket within the cave's network. It wasn't likely, but still possible. The search operation ultimately concluded abruptly when a diver, battling against a powerful current, narrowly escaped after his face mask was torn off and he was dragged deeper into the cave system. Fast forward to 1988, the Greek Ministry of Culture enlisted Swiss diver Jean-Jacques Bolans to map uncharted sections of the Lake Volagmeny cave complex. During his explorations, Bolans conducted numerous dives, ultimately finding a vast central chamber with an interior volume exceeding 1 million cubic yards or 1.3 million cubic meters. Although he found no sign of the missing Americans, Bolans theorized that they likely entered this chamber, became disorientated, and ultimately suffocated when their air supplies ran out. His theory provided the most plausible explanation for the tragic events. However, the case took a turn in 2006 when the Pan-Hellenic Association of Frogmen discovered the remains of 2 divers. These bodies were located in tight crevices 165 and 130 feet from the cave's entrance, with a third body found nearby shortly thereafter. Remarkably, one of the divers' tanks still contained air nearly 30 years later, suggesting their deaths might have been caused by factors other than suffocation or drowning. Though their bodies were too decomposed for immediate identification, rumors circulated that they were the Americans missing since 1978. DNA testing by Greek authorities initially returned negative results, yet subsequent tests confirmed the bodies were Donald, Joan, and Mark.